Hello, friends, and thank you as always for visiting the Legend Sports Universe YouTube channel, the Legend Sports Universe, where legends play forever. This is the Year 5 rookie draft for the Legend Sports Universe Baseball League, where we will take a look at the 5 players who will join each franchise for Year 6. A list made up of 4 players from each franchise's 100-player master pool, plus 1 Negro Leaguer. We'll show all 150 players here. We'll analyze things a bit, not just in terms of the individual players, but in terms of fit for each team. 12 Hall of Famers will join the LSUBL in Year 6, a lower total than the last couple of drafts, but those 12 are impact players, and there's a solid tier of second-level players entering the league as well from this class. I'm going to do this a bit shorter than past years since I'll also be discussing it a little bit on tomorrow night's Stuff of Legends podcast. So, with that said, let's get to it. And for me, the story of this draft starts in the American League Central, where the Detroit Tigers strike gold. A team built on pitching, but the offense has struggled, so they made the simplest, most effective pick of this entire draft. The Tigers draft Ty Cobb. That's it. That's the analysis. You have a problem scoring runs. You draft arguably the greatest hitter who ever lived, a lifetime 366 batting average. He single handedly balances their entire roster. The other picks here, like Joe Coleman and Vic Sorrell, certainly add to the pitching depth that's been their strength. But this draft is about one man. It's a perfect, beautiful, simple solution to the Tigers' biggest problem. Next, we head to Kansas City. The Royals have been tough to watch with a weak offense and no identity at third base, despite the fact that their pitching has been really strong. They executed what should be the blueprint for any struggling franchise. They had a black hole at third base, a position that has been a revolving door of mediocrity, as discussed on the last Stuff of Legends podcast. That ends here as the Royals bring in George Brett, a top 5 third baseman of all time in many circles, an inner circle Hall of Famer. He doesn't just fill a need, he transforms the entire identity of their offense with his talent, his fire, his leadership, that beautiful swing, and clutch performance. But the Royals weren't done there. They've been weak up the middle, so they added all-star shortstop Freddie Patek, a spark club who shores up the defense immediately. They even bolstered their improving outfield, which has been fortified the past 2 years with the acquisitions of Dwight Evans and Wally Berger, by adding a solid player in Al Cowens, addressing needs, including the biggest one, which they addressed in franchise-altering fashion. Desperately needed moves here by the Royals. Then you have a team in a similar boat, the San Diego Padres. Miserable, no contention in sight. But their draft is the stuff of dreams for a fan base that has had nothing to cheer about. They needed a star, a face of the franchise, and they get it. Tony Gwynn, Mr. Padre, joins the Padres next year, one of the purest hitters the game has ever seen. He is the core of the Padres offense for the next 20 years, ideally. But you look at the rest of the class, their rotation was mediocre. So they add Bill Holland, a legitimate ace from the Negro Leagues, who immediately becomes their best pitcher. They added some infield depth as well with Tim Flannery and Kevin Kuzminoff. Kuzminoff is really just going to be a bench role guy. He's not going to see any time behind Ken Caminiti. Flannery could start for them quickly as second base has been a bit of a revolving door. Bip Roberts has been erratic there, so Flannery may get a crack. Each pick here made sense in a draft that they headlined with a legend. A long way to go to contend, particularly in that NL West with the Giants and the Dodgers. But this is how that process begins. From 2 teams at the bottom, let's go to a team that was already decent, just not good enough. The Baltimore Orioles. A great defensive team, particularly on the infield and in center with Paul Blair, and they're stuck in a brutal division with the Yankees and the Red Sox. They needed more offense and another top tier pitcher to compete. Their catchers haven't hit, So they drafted Chris Hoyles, a solid backstop with pop. But the masterstroke here to me was the pick of Mike Flanagan. They needed a number three starter to slot in behind Musina and last year's top draft pick, Jim Palmer. They end up with a Cy Young winner. Now, Flanagan isn't a Hall of Famer by any stretch. He's not Musina or Palmer. But if Flanagan hits his ceiling, a rotation of Musina, Palmer, and Flanagan is a very, very strong trio. This is a targeted, intelligent draft that can help the Orioles try to fight for kind of what seems to be that revolving second wild card spot in the American League. From one bird to another, the St. Louis Cardinals absurdly talented, but they've been underperforming. Remember, the Cardinals made the NLCS in years 1 and 2, falling both times to the Giants. That Game 7 loss to the Giants in year 2, up 6-0 with 9 outs left, and falling 7-6 after the Willie Mays Grand Slam, started a decline that the Cardinals just haven't been able to pull out of. Their biggest issue was a lack of pitching depth behind Bob Gibson and Dizzy Dean. So what do they do here? They pick up Silver King, a 19th century ace who once won 45 games in a season. Can he be the answer? Again, pitchers from that era tend to struggle a little bit in a setting like this because they really don't strike out enough batters, even with regard to an era adjustment. But they also add Bobby Shantz, a former MVP pitcher who can start or relieve. He will likely end up in the bullpen with the Cardinals, who already have a solid pen. The potential of this draft fits the need for arguably the LSUBL's biggest underachiever. We'll stay here in the National League Central and visit the Chicago Cubs, a surprise contender last year. They ended up finishing the Giants' 3-year reign atop the National League. But they still lacked real power, though Bill Nicholson's addition certainly changed that a bit. Nicholson and Santo really the only power bats in that lineup, though. That problem is one that they no longer really have. The Cubs draft was surgical. They needed the offense. They pick up Cap Anson, a foundational Hall of Famer, and Frank Schulte, former most valuable player. That's a massive injection of slugging. Their pitching staff was a pitch to contact group. So they add a flamethrower in Carlos Marmol, one of the most unhittable relievers of his time, to help pick up the K's in the bullpen, where they can kind of bring in the heavy arms like the Kevin closer Lee Smith to kind of back up that rotation a bit. They've identified and they've addressed their flaws here. I like this draft from the Cubs. Next, we head down to Atlanta to take a look at the Braves, a perennially good team that can't get over the hump, primarily due to a lack of power from the infield, especially, particularly at third base, where Bob Horner has just not been able to get it to click since midway through year 2. This is a really intelligent, targeted draft by the Braves here. They directly address their biggest weakness, selecting Austin Riley as a slugging third baseman. They bolster their infield offense further, going behind the plate to do so, picking up Brian McCann. Now, it's gonna kind of be a fight among him, Javi Lopez, and Del Crandall to see who emerges from that trio as the main guy. But McCann, I gotta think, is at least going to get some time back there. One of the best offensive catchers of his generation, solid defensively as well. Julio Teheran is a nice arm to have in the bullpen. It's not out of the question that Teheran ends up being a guy who gets slid to the bullpen just because of the starting pitching depth that the Braves have. And of course, somebody who's absolutely going to go in the bullpen is Gene Garber. So again, quality depth there from the Braves. This is a nice, solid, not the big guns draft, but a solid draft for the Braves. Riley is going to get a chance to step in there right away and try to fill the role that Bob Horner has been unable to this point. Next, we head out to Cincinnati, another team with a struggling offense. They've kind of relied on Pete Rose and George Foster's power and tried to get bits and pieces from the other guys in that offense, but there's just no real pop coming out of that out of the Cincinnati lineup. And they try to change that a bit here. The pickup of Barry Larkin, a Hall of Fame shortstop, provides an offensive and a defensive upgrade with all due respect to Dave Concepcion. Concepcion hasn't hit a lick um, as of yet, and that is certainly really hurt Cincinnati as well. Concepcion's a fine defender, but Larkin can do both sides of the ball. And certainly a significantly better offensive force than Concepcion was. So adding Larkin, Carly Jones is a nice thumper to be able to put into that lineup as well. He'll fit in with the rest of that offensive group. Bob Bescher and Ival Goodman and Jay Bruce, Charlie Jones will get some at bats in that group. The pitching pickups, Billy Ryan's, Ted Abernathy, more stability for a staff that's kind of been, again, we talk about them overperforming, so you kind of try to get a little bit of backup in case anybody kind of slips to the level you were more expecting them at. Again, by no means hugely impactful pitchers, but decent guys who can contribute for you. Again, this is a team that is not contending as of now. They have tended to kind of hang around until about the All-Star break, and then they start to fade away a bit as the second half has gone on. But the Larkin pickup is a huge one here. I like the Jones pickup for them. I think this is a decent draft for the Reds. You start to build yourself towards contention with drafts like this. It's not going to vault you there, but it's a step of progress. But finally, the Houston Astros. This is a team that has needed help just about everywhere. And they got it on the offensive side of the ball here in a huge way. They add Lance Berkman, an elite switch hitting force. They then added Lee May, a forgotten and underrated 350 homer guy in his career. And then they draft Martin DeHigo, five-tool Negro League legend. With Bagwell at first, Berkman and DeHigo probably take the outfield corners next to Cesar Cedeno, who's been very good for the Astros. May plays DH, and the Astros improve significantly with one draft, one single shot. While the Cobb and the Brett picks win with the Padres get the eyeballs, and deservedly so, the Astros may have actually had the best draft in the league. We will start our next tier of selections with a bunch of teams that have already been very, very good. We'll open up with the San Francisco Giants, a dynasty to this point. Playoffs all 4 years, three times the National League pennant winners, two times the champions. Four straight division titles in the National League West. No real weaknesses. So, what do you do when you're already on top? You try and make sure that nobody can catch you. The Giants draft was a flex, a show of force to a degree. They had no real desperate needs, so they just accumulated an absurd amount of talent at pitcher. They drafted Hall of Famer Amos Russi. They drafted two-time 20-game winner Hooks Wiltz and Jim Barr, who was a solid pitcher who probably ends up shifting toward a bullpen role just by virtue of the depth the Giants have at starter. Remember, there's plenty of solid guys who aren't even making this rotation yet, particularly after they picked up Christy Mathewson, who's a rookie this year. So the Giants just keep on bringing in arm after arm, and eventually some of those guys may end up getting moved out or leaving. As free agency will start to become a bit more of a thing here at the end of year six. So teams perhaps kind of planning on that being an occurrence as well. But again, the Giants with no big need, they just kept on feeding the strength. Russi is a good pick here. Some guys in that rotation have started to fall off a little bit. Tim Keefe has started to decline a little bit after his first couple years were really good, and he started falling off last year, and he hasn't been great yet here in year five. So Keefe could end up being an odd man out for Russi down the line. From one California powerhouse to another, we go to the Giants' rival, the LA Dodgers. They lost in the NLCS last year. They have dominant pitching. Uh, Koufax, Kershaw, Dazzy Vance, they've been sensational. But the offense has been erratic. The interesting pick here is Gil Hodges, whose selection with the pending free agency of first baseman Dan Brothers may put the writing on the wall for Brothers' future here in LA. Hodges is a slick fielder and a terrific hitter who could step right in if needed. Holly the Bernedoodle weighing in there. Claude Osteen is another solid arm to add to the franchise's depth, and Dusty Baker enters the mix as a part-time outfielder and bench bat for LA. But the Hodges pick and how that will tie in to Dan Brothers' future here in LA. Brothers has been terrific for the Dodgers. But those two players and their stories will be something to watch. We thought that Brothers might leave after last season. We thought they might not offer him arbitration. They did to keep him around. He does still have one arbitration year left. But again, the selection of Hodges may make the Dodgers just say that it is time to move forward. We head back over to the American League and the Oakland A's off their record-setting 113-win campaign a year ago. They make a subtle pick to address their biggest weakness, defense, at their arguably weakest position, center field. This might actually be my favorite draft of the night from a sheer intelligence standpoint. The A's didn't need more home runs. They needed gloves. So they draft six-time Gold Glove winner Dwayne Murphy, who should get a shot there at center field. Remember, the A's had picked up Steve Finley in a trade. Finley's a good center fielder, but I believe that Murphy is a better center fielder defensively, even than Finley. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch. They also picked up Mark Ellis, who's another strong defender for the infield. He can help kind of back up Danny Murphy, who's been terrific at the plate, but is not a great defender. Basically, they surgically removed their only weakness. It is not a flashy draft by any stretch, but it's a solid one nonetheless. Then we move on to the Philadelphia Phillies, the two-time defending National League East champs. A very smart professional draft by the Phillies here. They didn't need a savior. They just needed to upgrade at the margins. Mike Lieberthal works his way into the catcher conversation alongside Darren Daulton and Carlos Ruiz. Aaron Nola becomes an arm in waiting for an already very strong rotation. Again, with Hamels and Lee, Pete Alexander leading the way now that he has blossomed here this season. He has been sensational for them. Jim Bunning, Robin Roberts. So they're set at starter, but now Nola gives them another guy in the pipeline should anybody move on, could they trade anybody, etc. Nothing big, nothing flashy, but a smart draft like this is the way that a team sustains success. Professional. That's the word for the New York Yankees draft. They got their headline guy in Hall of Fame closer Goose Gossage. You really can't argue with that. Gossage was terrific. They also pick up a possible huge peak guy. If Dellin Betances pitches to his best ability, that gives the Yankees just a really strong pen. Between those guys, they've already got Sparky Lyle out there. They've already got Dave Righetti out there. And again, with their rotation taking a step forward with this year's edition of Lefty Gomez, who's having a fine rookie season, now the Yankees are thinking in terms of locking down that back better. Um, it's not a draft that's going to blow you away with flash. Bill Skowron was a very key piece on the championship teams, but it's a solid, competent draft. This is a Yankees draft. Everyone is waiting for the megastars to arrive for the Yankees. If you've been following along with the LSUBL since its inception and you're following the Yankees are winning this division, but they still don't have Ruth. They don't have Mantle. They don't have DiMaggio, and they're still winning even without those guys. Absent getting any one of those guys, any one of that trio, this is a very solid draft for an already strong team. Next, we'll go with a few teams who drafted strong, but not really for their needs. And we'll start with the Yankees' rival, the defending champion Red Sox, who have a surplus of legendary outfielders. Ted Williams, Jim Rice, Mookie Betts. And what do? They draft Carl Yastrzemski. Now, Yastrzemski is an absolute legend. From a pure talent ability standpoint, it's hard to quibble with the Red Sox picking up Yastrzemski. They also grabbed Jimmy Pearsall, too, who can be a nice role outfielder for them. But their needs were at first base, third base, and catcher, and they ignored all of them. You can't give them a failing grade because Yaz is an all time great. But this draft is a failure of roster management unless they're planning a deal eventually. But remember, the last time they dealt from their outfielder surplus, sending Dwight Evans to Kansas City, the haul was mediocre at best. Up next, the Cleveland Indians. This team is absolutely loaded. They've got all stars everywhere. And that's what makes this draft so strange for Cleveland. The talent they acquired is robust. Rocky Colavito and the very solid Shin-Soo Choo. The problem is that they're both outfielders, and this team already has Manny Ramirez, Kenny Lofton, Larry Doby. Where do these guys play? Again, they're creating a positional logjam. It feels like a waste of resources, despite the quality of the players. The Indians, though, they have a similar problem as the Cardinals, and their LSUBL paths have been very similar. There's plenty of talent already on the roster. They just need it to come back together. Since they lost in the World Series to the Giants a couple years ago, they fell off last year. They're in the middle of the pack this year now in year 5. So the Indians really just need the guys they have to click. And what about the New York Mets? A team with an erratic offense, but a great pitching staff. The Mets took a fascinating approach here. They basically said, forget fixing the offense. Let's build a pitching staff so good it doesn't matter. And they might have done it. Adding Jacob deGrom to a staff already led by Tom Seaver is absolutely terrifying if you're an opponent. Then they added another all star in John Matlack. But deGrom is really the story here. And is it a flawed strategy to completely ignore your biggest weakness? Maybe. But the sheer quality of the arms that the Mets have throwing out there right now is pretty undeniable. They're obviously still waiting for Dwight Gooden. But Seaver and deGrom as a 1-2 will pitch with anybody any day of the week. If deGrom pitches to his peak and stays healthy, this draft is an absolute hit. Similarly, the Minnesota Twins currently have the best ERA in the LSUBL. Their offense is fundamentally strong. They have a lot of similarities to the Pirates, actually, in that way. But they don't have any real power. So they went out and they got 2 Hall of Fame bats in Goose Goslin and Sam Rice, the only franchise to add 2 Hall of Famers in this year's draft. But the Twins' offensive strength is their outfield. They have batting champion Lenny Dykstra, who they had acquired from the Mets a few years ago. Heine Manush coming off a strong rookie season. Rookie Bob Allison is now playing right, and they feel strongly enough about Allison that they were able to trade him. Trade J.D. Drew because Allison took over right field, and they traded J.D. Drew to the Brewers in the deal that just brought Paul Molitor over. Goslin and Rice can complicate that outfield picture a bit. Again, it's hard to argue the talent in getting Goslin and Rice, but other positions were more of a need here, shortstop in particular. A somewhat of a sleeper strong draft here, the Texas Rangers, a team that needed outfield production and a steady hand in the infield. The Rangers get both. Juan Gonzalez is a 2-time MVP, a pure slugger who absolutely transforms the middle of that lineup from day one. Toby Harrah is an underrated multi-time all-star shortstop who provides stability. Given the slow development of Elvis Andrus, they currently have Andrus down in the minors, and the Rangers are playing Ed Brinkman at shortstop right now. So Harrah, barring any major change as this season goes on, Harrah will walk right in as the shortstop in year 6. for the Rangers. Two big pickups, perfectly filling needs, and Gonzalez slotting into the middle of that order with Rafael Palmeiro and Mark Teixeira, with Adrian Beltre playing third, also in that heart of the order. Suddenly, the Rangers can really start building some thump in that lineup and trying to get themselves into contention again for a wild card spot. Remember, last year their big draft pick was Kevin Brown, who now Brown has made a very strong 1-2 punch with Gaylord Perry there. So the Rangers have a little something brewing, although they certainly are not near the contention point as of yet. Arizona Diamondbacks so far have been able to pitch a great top of the rotation with Randy Johnson and Kurt Schilling and Brandon Webb. They've got a terrific 1-2-3 punch there, although Schilling has struggled here in year five after a terrific year a year ago. But still, that's a very solid rotation. The Diamondbacks can't score. And so as a bad team in the midst of a full rebuild, they need offensive cornerstones, and they do a very good draft here for their status as a rebuilding team. They select Paul Goldschmidt, a perennial MVP candidate, franchise-defining first baseman. He's the kind of top middle of the order bat they've desperately needed to try and build around. They get another good starter in Robbie Ray. They get a quality arm in the Negro Leaguer, Jim Lamarck, to add to the existing pitching strength there. So it kind of follows a best player available kind of strategy. I mean, obviously, this isn't an open draft kind of thing, but from the kind of picks that they get, fit that formula. And that's a perfect draft for a team that is this far from contending and trying to get themselves some sort of a foundation to build upon. The Milwaukee Brewers are a team in flux after the big trade of Paul Molitor to the Twins, but they did a good job patching multiple holes here. Their outfield has lagged behind the competition, so they add two outfielders here. Solid players in Sixto Lezcano and Corey Hart. Hart kind of needs to reach his peak, but if Hart reaches his top potential, Hart gives you a little bit of a jolt in that outfield. But neither guy is really a difference maker. They help. It's a step forward, but not a huge step forward. The key pick to me for the Brewers here is Josh Hader, who is a dominant game shortening reliever. And that's something that the Brewers have really, really needed for a few years now. In Pittsburgh, the Pirates have gotten surprisingly good pitching from their old school rotation. Cannonball Ed Morris, Jesse Tannehill, Deacon Phillip, Babe Adams. They neglected to add the big bat, though, that they really need. They do add another potentially solid rotation piece in John Candelaria, somebody who wasn't in black and white pictures. But at some point, Pittsburgh needs to get some heavy artillery behind Clemente and Stargell. Our good friend Beatles Eternally keeps on waiting for those bats. He'll be disappointed with this draft. Um, Don Clendenin, obviously, as a Mets fan, Clendenin's role with the Mets after his Pirates career was done. He's certainly well known as being part of that. Clendenin's a nice roll bat. He'll fill a bench spot for the Pirates, but Clendenin's not really an impact guy. There's just not a lot of impact here for the Pirates unless Candelaria hits his absolute peak, and then he fits into this rotation very nicely. The Montreal Expos are in a full rebuild, building around Oscar Charleston, who's having a solid and increasingly improving rookie campaign. The pickup of Pascual Perez gives them a potentially solid back end starter, and Larry Parrish gives them a potential DH bat with Ryan Zimmerman currently holding down third base. But the big pick here for the Expos may be Oscar Charleston's Negro League contemporary, Jelly Gardner, a strong defender and speedster who could play center and allow the Expos to play Charleston regularly at first base, or move him to right and put Rusty Staub at first base. Gardner gives them the flexibility that is perfect for a rebuilding franchise. The Toronto Blue Jays draft, staying in Canada, is an interesting one. They continue to try to solidify their outfield. And the solid Lloyd Mosby may finally give them a legit everyday center fielder if the recently acquired Curtis Granderson doesn't pan out. But they also picked up Orlando Hudson when they already have Roberto Alomar, who has one more arbitration year remaining. Now, Alomar's been solid, though a slight underperformer. Are the Blue Jays thinking of moving on from Alomar? Then they drafted three first basemen, none of whom are a particularly impact player, while they have Vlad Guerrero Jr. at first, even with the trade of John Olerud to Detroit in the Granderson deal. That's just a poor allocation of resources there from the Blue Jays. So a questionable draft for Toronto. And I always liked Lloyd Mosby. I liked Lloyd Mosby as a player. And I liked Orlando Hudson as a player too. But I mean, I always thought Mosby was a very kind of solid, underappreciated center fielder. But this isn't by any means a move the needle draft for the Blue Jays. And if you're trying to hang with the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Orioles, even, you need to move the needle more than the Blue Jays did here. Fighting for the worst draft slot, we'll start with the California Angels, a team that needs everything. And this draft, frankly, is sad. This is a franchise with Mike Trout, Frank Tanana, and very little else. They're desperate for impact talent, for hope, and this draft provided none of it. Their top pick, their best player was Kirk McCaskill, who will be a decent back of the rotation starter at this point. But the rest of the guys are all role players. There are no stars here. For a team in their position to come away with a haul this uninspiring is a colossal failure. It's hard to see how they get better anytime soon, as the Mariners have started to improve, the Rangers have started to improve a bit. So the Angels, that surprising year one wild card spot. If you remember, they upset the Yankees in a rout in the wild card game in year one. And that feels like forever ago at this point. Similarly, the Colorado Rockies, they have a team that can hit with anyone. Todd Helton, Larry Walker, Carlos Gonzalez, Troy Tulowitzki, Matt Holliday, but they have a historically bad pitching staff, even if it has incrementally moved the needle forward this year. Their only real need, though, is pitching. This is an F minus draft. Without exaggeration, one of the worst managed drafts I have ever seen. Their one singular, glaring, desperate need was starting pitching. So what do? They draft an outfielder in Charlie Blackmon. Not even a bat at a but it's not even that they drafted a bat, but they draft a bat here at a positional strength. They're loaded in the outfield already. So they add to their single greatest strength and completely ignore their only weakness. It's organizational malpractice and it's baffling, just a catastrophic failure here by the Rockies. The Tampa Bay Rays, well, it saves the Rockies possibly from being the worst draft in LSUBL history. Actually, and Blackman's a better player than Kirk McCaskill. So, I mean, you could even put the Rockies ahead of the Angels there. But this Rays draft, I mean, there is zero impact here. Absolutely none. The Rays, I don't know. You could see a 1962 Mets, the White Sox of a couple years ago kind of record come up from the Rays here. They've got nothing going on right now, and they do nothing to improve here. And that in a league like this, to not most franchises in a league set up of this way are going to continue to make steps forward every year. Some big, some small, some have better pools to draft from than others. But everybody in a setting like this is usually going to take some sort of a step forward. The Rays don't even take a baby step forward here. Just an absolute atrocity of a draft. Quickly touching on the rest of the league here, the Chicago White Sox, nice player in Chet Lemon. Always like Chet Lemon, but there's not really a heck of a lot else there for Chicago. The Mariners, who have had a very nice season so far through the first 2 months here in year five, They had a decent catcher in Dan Wilson, solid defensively. He was kind of a bit of a cornerstone is a weird word to use for a guy of Wilson's ability. He was by no means a superstar, but he felt like Dan Wilson was there forever. Um, but again, the Mariners add little else. The Marlins get one good pitcher in Alex Fernandez and nothing else. So, none of those franchises move the needle at all. There's nothing atrocious about those drafts. Again, you can call any of those a baby step forward. Certainly the Rays are the worst draft here in year 5, and it's not even a close comparison. With the draft complete, we get back to the season, which will pick up with June of year 5 this week. I appreciate you tuning in as always. Bang that like button if you haven't as of yet. Subscribe if you haven't as of yet. And most importantly, be good to each other, and we'll talk soon. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow night at 10 p.m. for the next episode of the Stuff of Legends podcast. Good night, everybody.